analysts that Ukraine would fold under Russia's military in a few weeks, with Russia's army being ranked as the second most powerful military in the world under the United States. But now, more than a year later, Ukraine has defied these predictions and showed Russia's weak state. Plus, with the help of the West's support, has been able to successfully stop Russia's advance and push the Russians out from Kiev into their territory, and up to 14,000 Russians, according to the UN, have lost their lives in the conflict. And Ukraine has started counterattacking into Russian-occupied territory majorly, and has recaptured the northeastern regions of Ukraine. After Putin's illusion of quick victory has collapsed, what is daily life in Russia like today? At the start of Putin's special military operation, we saw mass anti-war protests in Russia, especially in the Russian capital of Moscow, with thousands of Russians coming out in the streets to protest their country's invasion of Ukraine. In a rare moment in the history of Putin's rule over Russia, although they still continue in different cities across Russia, it hasn't been to the scale we saw at the early days of the war. The decrease in protesters has been due to Putin's harsh crackdown against anti-war sentiment in Russia. This was due to the law introduced by the government on March 4, 2022, which made it illegal to participate in any form of anti-war protests, which, if you were caught protesting, could mean up to 15 years in prison. And in propaganda in Russia, they were portrayed as weak and not loyal to their country. And as Russians saw what was happening to the anti-war protesters in their country, they became more and more paranoid about being reported to the Russian police, and conversation about the war in Ukraine slowed down in Russian homes. At least homes in the areas of Russia Putin has large control over. Because in the Far East near the Ural Mountains on the borders of Siberian Russia, citizens aren't as paranoid in talking about the war and can mostly talk about the war in freedom, with even some cities' mayors criticizing the war in Ukraine openly. And their citizens are also quick to criticize the war in Ukraine. Another one of the actions that affects Russians the most is the West's sanctions of Russia. Major economic powers like the UK, France, Germany, and the US have all sanctioned Russia in a bid to punish Russia for their hostilities. This led to Russia's economic strength decreasing slightly, and major companies started to leave the country. This affected Russian citizens quite a lot. Companies like Starbucks left in March 2022, ceasing business in the country, leaving many Russians without their morning Starbucks coffee. But Russia has now replaced Starbucks with Stars Coffee, not straying too much from the original name. McDonald's also left Russia after only a few decades of business in the country, which actually affected Russians, as McDonald's is very popular in Russia. But it didn't matter, because Russia quickly replaced McDonald's with Tasty, and that's it, with the Big Mac being replaced with the Big Hit and new options on their menu like chicken wings. But the sanctions did seriously affect the lives of Russians. Many grocery prices have went up, like tomatoes and peppers, and meats like sausages and beef have went up in price since the Western sanctions hit Russia, making cost of living in Russia go up. This put a strain on Russian families' budgets, and some started to leave Russia in hopes of a better life. Many intellectuals left Russia as well and fled to the West. Right now, Russia has restricted its borders slightly, especially with Georgia and other smaller countries. Although intellectuals leaving Russia has not had much of an effect right now, as it is preoccupied with its war, it will in the future, and this brain drain will be hard to fix. The front in Ukraine has become a meat grinder for the Russians, and up to 14,000 have lost their lives, as most Russians don't really want to fight. Putin called a partial mobilization of Russia on September 21, 2022. As soon as the news came out of Putin's mobilization of Russia, men already started to book flights, and the price of flights skyrocketed, with families leaving to countries like Ukraine, Georgia, and other countries, even defecting to the West. Many Russian men left their country as exiles. Russia is already in demographic collapse and doesn't have the birth rate to sustain their population. Russia lost an additional 1 million plus men to defection due to the draft. Others purposely broke their bones to avoid going to the front. And reports have surfaced that 2 Russian men defected to the US by going through the eastern sea of Russia to Alaska. For some, though, they inevitably had to go join the army and were given little training before being sent to the front line in Ukraine with Soviet-era weaponry, being paid about $24 monthly, which left their families with little income coming and leading to many Russian women taking up jobs again. And sadly, some Russian families will never see their loved ones again, as many of them are dying within their first weeks in the front in Ukraine due to their lack of proper equipment and little training. Similar to Westerners, Russians have similar fears to their Western counterparts, and many are extremely scared of the prospect of nuclear war with the West, as they want to raise their kids and not have to endure a nuclear war. And as the war goes on, more Russians seem dissatisfied with Putin's war in Ukraine, and once again the number of anti-war protests are picking up again. The future of Russia and Russians' lives are very uncertain, and many are scared of what will happen after the collapse of Putin's regime, as many have not seen a Russia without Putin, and he has been their stability for years, and they are hoping that the war is over soon.